Welcome to Musicians versus the World, the podcast where we explore aspects of music and musician life that may not have been covered in music school. I am your host, Christine Smith, and today we are visiting Middle-earth to discuss the score of The Lord of the Rings, The War of Rohirrim, with Emmy award-winning composer Stephen Gallagher and Grammy award-winning producer-engineer Mark Willsher. Their goal in this project was to honor the narrative of the film by blending the beloved design and musical language of the original Lord of the Rings trilogy with ideas befitting Kamiyama-san's beautiful hand-drawn anime. So Stephen and Mark, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Musicians versus the World.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And I appreciate you joining us from so far away. Mark, you're staying up a little bit late to talk to us from London, and Stephen waking up super early from New Zealand, right?
Super early for a weekend. Yeah. Christine,
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. And I'm so excited. I was watching The War of the Rohirrim earlier this week with my family, and we all just loved it. And I was listening to the music, and I was so impressed with how you were able to combine like your new music with while still honoring like the sound of the old. And so I can't wait to talk with both of you about that. Before we do, I would love to hear a little bit about both of you. Maybe your history in music. Have you both always wanted to be in the music industry as musicians? Mark, why don't we start with you? How did you get to where you are now?
Well, it was in middle school. I had the option to take music, drama, or visual arts, and I decided to take music. And at the time, and then I had to choose an instrument. And the only instrument that I knew what it was the trumpet. So I started playing the trumpet, and soon after picked up the piano as well. And so throughout high school, I was pretty much decided that music was what I wanted to do. But at the time, I was purely thinking about it from a performing standpoint. And I went to university as a performance major and was fully intending to keep playing. But while I was in university, I needed a job, and there was a part-time job recording concerts. And I got that even though I knew nothing about recording at that point in time. But I very quickly learned a lot and hung out with, this was in Canada, and I hung out with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation engineers who would come to do a lot of broadcasts of concerts and events and things. And very soon, people started coming to me to do the recordings rather than the staff that were actually there for that purpose. And so by the time I was at the end of my degree, I was barely playing and constantly producing and engineering recordings. So then I went and did a postgraduate engineering program. And then at that point, it was still, wasn't thinking at all about film. I just wanted to make records. And then I sort of purely by coincidence, well, I suppose not totally coincidence, but an opportunity came up where there was a specific request that at the time there weren't a lot of people who met that, which was someone who had a classical background, had done a lot of classical production, but also understood technically how films were made and produced. And so I got a job, and that was actually on the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. And then that just kind of took off, and I found that seemed to be pretty good at having a good sense for what worked dramatically with film and music. And then it's just kind of been a long ride since then. But my work's pretty much still divided between film work and records.
So your first foray into film was the original Lord of the Rings?
That's correct.
Whoa.
I did do a film right before that. That was kind of a test, which was a David Fincher film called Panic Room. I guess that test went reasonably well because then I got hired to do the.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, that makes sense because the original is so, I mean, it's operatic, like almost, it's so classically based.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah. How did you even find out about that? Was it like
Oh, well, that was sort of,
Wanted poster? I don't
so I lived in San Francisco at the time, and a lot of classical projects I did out at Skywalker Ranch.
Oh, okay.
And so I knew the people out there, and it was they who were asked if they knew someone who met these criteria,
Mhm.
and they gave my name. So.
Well, and then you being a brass player, I bet you had a lot of fun with The Lord of the Rings with so much brass.
Yeah, no, there were definitely a lot of brass, and some interesting. Most of the trumpet parts were played on these low F trumpets,
Mhm.
because Howard wanted a much darker sound. Um, but yeah, no, it was. I mean, it was an amazing experience, and I also, I mean, I've loved the books growing up, and
Right.
I'd been a big fantasy fan for a long time. I mean, and so it was kind of it was pretty magical. But it was also a rude awakening into the world of film production, coming
Yeah.
in a situation where budget wasn't much of a consideration, and then after that, having the realization that that's not how all films are made.
No. True, true. And so I guess those films were a good test run for this film now, for the, War of the Rohirrim, right?
Well, yeah, it's sort of for me, it's been kind of an odd, I did the original trilogy. I turned 30 during Two Towers,
Mhm.
and then I turned 40 right before The Hobbit, and
Mm.
then we did this right after I turned 50. So it's sort of every decade, I seem to delve into Middle Earth.
They've gotta plan something for the next time, for the next big birthday. How about you, Stephen? What's your background? How did you end up in all of this?
I'm still trying to figure that out a little bit, actually, Christine. The Sorry, it's a little early here. Um, well, I didn't really start playing or getting into music until quite late. I was about maybe 11 or 12 when I got really interested in synthesizers. There was
Mm.
kind of magical boxes that made incredible sounds, and I was sort of curious about them. I couldn't afford one, um, but I got as much reading material about them as I could. I joined a band, and we were playing, I guess, sort of classic. I guess what's now classic rock. I studied music through high school because I thought it would be a good, thing to do.
Mhm.
I wasn't really that passionate about it until one day in class when our teacher she didn't accidentally, she begrudgingly played this cassette of music from the latter part of the 20th century.
Mm.
And after studying, Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn and Brahms, all genius, brilliant composers,
Mhm.
but whose music I could never relate to emotionally or um,
Yeah.
she played things by John Cage, by Stockhausen, by George Crumb, and hearing this absolutely blew my mind and made me think that potentially a career in writing music was possible because the composers that I was hearing that she was playing off this cassette, the sound world was really like amazing.
Mm.
And especially in the case of George Crumb, seemed to operate on a different plane of composing where sort of color and gestures were sort of more important or as equally as important as like thematic development or yeah.
Mhm.
So then I decided to go to university, studied music, uh, walked across the road to the theater and film department, met a girl.
It's always a girl.
It's always a girl. And convinced her to let me write the music for her theater production so I could have an excuse to hang out with her. um, the people she introduced me to in her theater company were incredible. Uh, they were excited about the same sort of things that I was excited about. We started collaborating together, and this was really the point where, for me, the music felt like it could be part of something else, like a part of a story.
Mm.
And I found that really, really exciting. So I did a lot of theater. I signed a terrible record deal with this band. The band the band and theater were kind of two main focuses for a while, at the expense of potentially some of my uh university work. And then Wellington, I live in Wellington, New Zealand, and it's a very, very small city. So in a country of, at the time, probably just over 3 million people, the city was maybe 400,000. So basically what that translates to is, if you are interested in a specific field, it's very easy to meet other people who are interested in the same thing. And in my experience, most people are very generous and happy to share ideas and experience. And for me, that happened when I was working in theater. There was another sound designer called Chris Ward, and he was working as a dialogue editor on the Lord of the Rings films. And so I used to go and knock on his door and bug him about potentially becoming a dialogue editor. And he politely politely informed that I wasn't a dialogue editor, and that there was no work for me as a dialogue editor. And then I think it was about a year later, he called me and said, what are you doing next week? We're working on a film with a composer that I know that you're a big fan of, and would you like to come and help us try and put a temp score for this film together? The composer is Brian Eno, and the film is called The Lovely Bones. And that was my first time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So that was my first time working on a big film, and my first experience of working as a music editor. And through becoming a music editor, that's how I met Mark Willsher, when we both worked on the Hobbit trilogy. But throughout all of this, I was still maintaining writing music and writing music for TV and for film, and sort of less and less for theater. And then the two of us met on the first Hobbit trilogy. I'd already heard about Mark. He was a legend in Pike Road Post, where I was working. People used to talk about him in reverential tones. So when I got the opportunity to meet him, I was really looking forward to asking him lots of silly questions. He was very patient, and then we started hanging out, and we became friends. And yeah, we started collaborating. I think it was like 2000. Was it 2013, 2014 when you mixed a documentary score for me?
That's probably 2014, maybe.
Yeah, and that was our first collaboration. And then once you've had something mixed by Mark Willsher, you can't have anything mixed by anybody else, because he's the best. And no, I mean, it's been a privilege, like to have the friendship and then to be able to work together, and learn a great deal from Mark. So that's my vague rambling summation of our path so far. Thank you.
No. Well, that's amazing. That's great that you're able to collaborate and work together. What does that collaboration look like? I know you've been composing and mixing together on a couple of projects, but what's kind of like the workflow? Is it like you compose and then send it over, or is it more like back and forth? What's it like?
Well, I think I really feel fortunate that our workflow tends to be, well, to start with a discussion. And one of the things I love is that we're able to bounce ideas off of each other before I write a note. And that's a really important part of the process for me, like just conceptualizing, getting excited about ideas. And then, because we're in two different time zones as well, essentially we have like a 24-hour workflow, so we can we can meet in New Zealand morning, UK evening, or UK morning, New Zealand evening. I can start writing, put some ideas together. I can go to bed. Mark wakes up, he listens to it. We have a feedback session, or and then maybe I do some refinements. When I wake up again, I send the music to him. I go to bed. He's up. He mixes, makes it sound amazing. I get up, listen to it, and go, Mark, you're a genius. And that's pretty much how it works.
So it's like a 24-hour work. That's amazing. That's
that's a
great.
huge
There's
advantage.
no stops. I think that
No,
you can
never
do
stop.
turnaround time really, really well. That's I love that. So Mark, what is it about your mixes that if anyone were to listen to yours, they'd never want to work with anyone else? What's your secret?
I don't really know that there's necessarily a secret. I mean, it's ultimately, I think that, like working with Steven, I mean, I would say that it's kind of really like two musicians working well together.
Mhm.
It's like we have a good sense of, how each other hears things. We hear things in similar ways. So, it's basically when I'm working on Steven's stuff, I mean, I have, a reasonable amount of skill around the technical side of it, but I think a lot of it is really just, shaping and bringing out what I think is in Steven's mind anyway. And it's like sort of I think that kind of collaboration, I mean, is really just, like, because I think we all tend to hear music in different ways, I would say. And, like, so I think for us collaborating, like it works well in that I think I hear Steven's music in a way that makes sense to him, but he's also very open to things being different. And I think I would say of all the people I work with, Steven's probably the most like, if something comes out completely different than what he thought it was going to be, his first reaction is not, oh no, what's happened? He'll sort of think more like, oh, why did Mark go in that direction? And then we can have discussions about it. And so I would really liken it to if we were both just playing together.
Yeah, I think that's a
And
really
that
good
kind of like
analogy.
it just happens that Steven's writing and programming and I'm recording and mixing, but it's the same type of musical relationship, I would say.
100%. Yeah, I would agree with that. But I would also add to that the reason that Mark Willsher, or one of the many reasons that Mark's work is so great, is especially in film, his focus is always with the story, and the audience, but fundamentally serving the story, serving the intent of both myself and the director or producer or whoever we're collaborating with as a storyteller. And I think because we're both focused that way, this is why, I mean, I think Mark's, one of the reasons I think he's absolutely brilliant is because there are idiosyncratic things that he can find sometimes, and to highlight in such a way that it serves the story better. And it could be just something small like, turning a bass drum up, or turning something down, or just muting an instrument, something along those lines that may not on paper seem like a big choice, but has like really positive ramifications on the subtext, or the way that we interpret the visual information before us in the film. Yeah, I think that's one of the many things that makes him such a great storyteller, really. Storytelling through mixing.
I think it's worth adding to this that it's not entirely like, there obviously like a major part of it is the composition and then the mixing of all the material, together for what the end result is. But, there's a lot of the things that happen, will be like, as Stephen was describing, like, with the sort of what feels like it would be an impediment with the distance between us has, this benefit, because in the sense of like when Stephen, we might talk about something and then he'll go off and create something and come up with a bunch of ideas and send them to me when he goes to bed. And then when he gets up in the morning, he's not waiting. He's got any thoughts I have on it immediately. And I think it works pretty well in a way too, because in that regard, I can kind of be sort of like a friendly, not like a not scary sounding board,
Okay.
in terms of on the music, like, where it's not like, before stuff goes to the director or the
Yes.
producer or something,
Yeah.
Gotcha.
that there's been sort of a another party
Who's
sort
had
of
their ears on
observing
it.
and experiencing it. And
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. And I also would add that putting non-scary sounding board on your business card would be a really good thing to do. But
and
that is a really important point, though, because that is a terrifying moment when you've been working on something and you're about to present it to the director or somebody else for the first time. That is actually a moment that inspires terror in me, and I think for a lot of composers. So to have the benefit of the incredible privilege, actually, of being able to play Mark these ideas and feel like you're in a safe space, that the importance of that cannot be overstated. It's
Yeah.
it's a really huge thing.
So when you say like bounce off ideas, are you thinking like compositionally, like say, oh, I think that might be too many, like that line might be too muddy right there, like take
Yep,
that out?
there could be things like that. Stop, yeah, stop using so many synthesizers.
when are you going to buy a decent French horn sample?
Open to offers.
Um,
Yeah, but I mean, it could be that, but it also conceptual things or story points.
Mhm.
Like maybe I've interpreted a note or an intent from the director in a certain way,
Mm.
and Mark offers a counter idea to how to interpret that, which then I can sort of take and work into the composition. Or sometimes he's like, "Your voice leading sucks." Well, he's never said that, but I mean,
It doesn't seem like he would say
inherent in
something.
the subtext of the conversation, I believe.
Well, and that's where your classical background and your performance training come in so handily in a project like this, Mark, for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Let's talk a little bit about this project in particular, because you both have extensive experience with the Lord of the Rings world, and now you're working in animation and animation's feel, and then also, um, your lead composer now and a different director completely. What were some of the things that were different this time versus, The Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings trilogy? Either one. Whoever would like
Yeah,
to start that
well,
first would be
I
fine.
would start off by saying the medium of anime is a hugely different experience to work on than live action. And simply because when I first saw the film, there were sections that were complete or further along the track to being complete than other parts of the film. The majority of the film when I saw it was like line drawings.
Mm, mm,
If you can imagine sort of a beautiful halfway point between like the etchings of like say Marc Chagall and the cave paintings of
somewhere
Neolithic
there,
sort
huh?
of southern, yeah. It's but beautiful, but quite abstract.
Yes.
So the way that you receive the visual information in when working with anime means you need to engage a lot more of your visual imagination because it's simply not there in front of you. Whereas with a live action film, even if it's a film that requires a lot of visual effects, you're still seeing the characters, how they look, how they dress, how they move, their
Mhm.
facial expressions. Those things are, generally there from when you start your work. But the anime, that stuff comes very slowly.
Mm.
It's not there at the start, so I feel like we were constantly refining our musical approach as the animation, was sort of more and more complete.
Mhm.
Um, and also just stylistically, Kamiyama-san, the director, his visual approach is within anime is quite different as well. The way the camera moves, his choice of what visual information to present to, to sort of carry subtext or meaning. And while the design language and the environments are really familiar, you look at them and you're like, oh, it feels absolutely like I'm in Middle Earth. The way the characters interact, there's just a different visual style, and I guess I'm trying to say, and that requires a different musical approach in a lot of respects, because as human beings, we're taught that facial expression or body language conveys a lot of subtext in our everyday conversation. So such that we're attuned to, like, a subtle eyebrow raise or a slight cocking of the head can have gravitational meaning. And in anime there's not so much of that, so I felt like the music had to carry a little bit more of this kind of subtext. That's for me the first difference.
No,
Mark
that's
Willsher?
very true.
Yeah, no, that's all really, good stuff. I think there were, a couple of things I just add to that. And one of the very interesting things with Kamiyama's work, and also with Stephen ultimately starting to write music pretty early on in terms of where the picture was that there were a few interesting times. Like, I remember one review we were sitting in, and Stephen, we had this new picture that we were looking at, and Stephen commented on how beautiful this sort of fire was sitting with the music, and Kamiyama smiled, and then he said that he had the animators redo the fire to fit with music that Stephen had written.
That's right.
Oh, wow.
And so he was, and there were other
Yeah,
things like that,
amazing.
where he, unbeknownst to us, was making changes visually because of what the music was doing. And there was a funny time towards the end of the film, when we were in the final mix of the film, where something had gotten changed along the way because of some other things. And then we were in this one moment, and it's when Alwyn bursts through the door to save Hera at Isengard, and it had changed, and then it was like he was clearly not happy, and it took a while to figure out. And what it was is that he'd redesigned the entry around the way the music had played, and then because of some other changes, that music had changed. And the music still worked well visually with what was there, but it now wasn't working in the way that he had, designed the picture around. So, but fortunately, it was a pretty easy fix on our part to kind of roll back and make sure we had what he wanted. But there were some interesting things like that. And then the other thing I'd say, one of the things that was, early on in this, when we initially started work on it, it seemed very clear, like, that it was, given the visual design, given the world it was trying to live in, that it was very, like, everyone wanted it to be like the original trilogy in terms of the music, and which obviously we didn't have. Not only, we didn't have any of the resources that that we had back then.
Right.
But as the film went on, actually, and Kamiyama got more used to Stephen's music, he actually started encouraging us to branch out, and that we didn't have to follow strictly in things. And there was, even to the point of the use of a lot of Howard's themes earlier on, we thought we'd be having to use a lot more. And then as Stephen was writing and things came along, it was like, no, let's be really sparing. So there were some changes like that. And then the only other thing I'd add, just sort of specific to anime, just on a more sort of technical level with the music, one thing, when it came time to putting it all together, one of the things that we found with mixing was that we ended up going for a much closer, not dry, but drier sound than we were originally expecting to do, and what we would have done for live action. But it was really interesting with the anime because with a more sort of like what we would think of as the live action score sounding like, it sounded sort of like it was somehow behind the movie and it wasn't a part of the movie.
Or
And so we had to kind
Oh.
of bring it up a little closer and tighter, and then it sort of became part of the story. But um, that was sort of probably the biggest thing for me that I hadn't even considered, that just became apparent as we were working on it. That was a real, for me, it was a real big change from
Right.
all the previous films.
Right,
yeah,
because with
100%.
the live action, you want it to feel bigger than life and,
Yeah.
you know, epic and huge. Oh, but with animation and anime, it's like right there. It's a little bit more intimate.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something about, the 2D images, and
Mm.
Yeah.
it just did somehow was, it just didn't feel right.
How
Yeah,
interesting. Did you
yeah, that
find that pretty early on, or was it more towards the end that you figured?
I'd say it was more towards the end, because it was
Okay.
when I was mixing down at Park Road on the stage, and we had it, we were in a cinema, and we had a big, we were looking at it in that kind of world rather than on a smaller monitor while we're recording, and
Right.
so is at the point we're kind of putting everything together, but also seeing it in that sort of cinema context
totally.
really changed it, because it
So
wasn't
what
Absolutely.
too noticeable when we were watching it on a TV type screen.
Mm.
Right. How did that conversation go? You're there in the studio and you think, "Oh, did it take some convincing of everybody else to say, "Oh, no, we need this to be drier?"
No, I mean, it just kind of happened, we
Yeah.
just, we were just changing things and getting to a point where we're happy, and then
Okay. How interesting. That is so interesting. But you were still able to, even though the mix was different, you were still able to keep it within that Lord of the Rings world and sound
I
design
think so.
world. Yeah. Well, as an audience member, I think you did a great job. It was I thought it was
Great.
wonderful.
Yeah. I
So
mean, that was definitely, I mean, it was obviously, it kind of had to be that way, given, like, obviously with all the, the visuals, which, is, you can imagine, were based off, like, so much was based off all the artwork done for the original trilogies. So
Mhm.
it, even though it's, this anime and it's hand drawn, it's still, it still very much feels like that world.
Mhm.
And so,
Right,
so the music definitely had to, it had to,
right.
it could vary, but it definitely had to inhabit that world in the same way that the visuals did.
Right, right. So just kind of speaking about these differences, and you were talking about how, you didn't actually use as many themes from the original trilogies as you thought you would. How did you make I mean, I heard, like, there's the ring theme, and there's the little Easter egg of when you talk about Gandalf and, things like that, but how did you decide and obviously the Rohan theme kept coming back over and over, but how did you decide what to leave in there and then what to, branch out and do something new? What was that decision like?
It's a conversation that was continually evolving, really. I think
Mhm.
when we had the opportunity to use Howard themes, we wanted to do so in the most respectful manner we could, but
Right.
also in the manner, well, fundamentally and primarily, in a manner that would serve Kamiyama's story to the best of our ability. It was the first theme for us, obviously, was the Rohan theme. It's such a key identifier of the Rohirrim culture.
Mhm.
And immediately when you hear that theme, you are sort of you're back in Middle Earth. That was a
Mhm.
really important theme for us to be able to use. But again, we used it pretty sparingly because we didn't want to rely on it. We didn't want to make it a crutch. We didn't want to feel like we were exploiting it unnecessarily.
Mm.
And also, we're serving a story or writing a music for writing the score for a film that is set hundreds of years before the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And as such, the culture that we are dealing with in the Rohan, they're in a different part of their civilization is in a very different state than when we see it in the Two Towers. So in the Two
Mhm.
Towers, it's in a sort of state of decline. But here in when we see it in the War of the Rohirrim, I wouldn't say it's necessarily it's at its zenith, but it's definitely, let's just say, robust and kind of healthy. So in terms of addressing the cultural context of the film, it felt important that we did that in a manner that spoke to our experience of it at the time the film takes place.
Hmm.
The other themes we use, so I love that you picked up on Gandalf's theme. That's great. That was
Not Gandalf's theme.
sorry, not Gandalf's theme. The nature theme. Yes,
Oh, it's the
one that
nature theme.
the nature theme that happens on.
Which tends to be associated with Gandalf.
Well,
It does.
That's
Yeah.
so funny because I thought it was like the moth theme for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it's actually.
But then
called
when
the
I
nature
heard it
theme.
in this movie, I was like, oh, it must be the Gandalf theme then. But
Well, it's
So, okay.
it's what we chose that one because it's the one you associate with Gandalf asking for help or reaching out to sort of, you
Uh-huh.
know, ask for assistance, and we thought that was probably the most appropriate theme to use, a little kind of Easter egg to use.
Yeah.
But the ring theme, because every single film in the trilogy starts with that theme.
Oh,
As the cars come up.
hold
Oh,
on.
wait a minute.
Hold on. Let's not revise history here.
Okay, all right.
We actually haven't talked about this because no one asks us about this,
This is true.
and I think it would be good to talk about this.
It would be immoral not to. You're right. Okay.
So the ring theme actually originally, so the ring theme was written for when the goblins are rooting through looking for rings.
Mhm.
And the one goblin opens up his pouch and puts the ring in, and you see the rings.
That is true.
The ring.
Yeah.
Originally, that's where
that is true.
The theme occurred, and that's the only place that we actually recorded the theme for.
Yes.
And it was purely this sort of, at the time, was like this when we saw the scene and we were going through it. It's like, well, this seems like if we're going to use the ring theme, like it should be here.
Mhm.
Like this is the obvious place that it would
Mhm.
be. And because we did feel like it was important to make these kind of nods to, if something was logical, that was, we didn't want to use themes incorrectly or for the sake of using them, but
100%.
if there was a logical place. So that was there. But then what happened, which tends to happen on a lot of movies, is what happens at the very beginning in terms of like the opening credits and the text and all that tends to come quite late in the day.
Mm.
And so originally the overture, the music that starts the film, started, that music started when the eagles are flying in and you're coming over the map and then we were talking a lot about it, and we knew that there were going to be titles, but no one could really give us a clear indication of what they would be or how long they were. And so we sort of looked at the previous films and looked at the various things involved, and basically we took a guess, and then we had this discussion, and it was like, we're like, well, ideally, Steven's going to write something that is malleable so that if that length changes, we can kind of squeeze it or, pull it apart a bit to get what length we needed, because we knew that we wanted to start with music. All of these films have started music dead from the beginning, setting the mood of where things are. Yeah. It's never been any logo music or anything like that. So we definitely didn't want that, but we were guessing. And then what happened is that our guess was significantly too short. And so we had this nice little opening thing that Stephen had done, which is what you hear at the very beginning. And then we had the overture when the Eagles, but then we had this hole. And it was like, what can we do here? How can we fill this hole? And it just so happened at the same time, we decided that bit of the ring theme later on when the goblins are doing that was too much music, and it was interfering with what they were saying, and that it was a space we just should not have music. be outside in the cold,
Yeah.
hear them breathing, hear clearly what they're talking about, and not try to get involved there. And then it was like, and so then it became this natural, okay, well, we've taken that out, but all the other films have always had the ring theme at the beginning,
Right.
over the logos. And how would that look if we took this and we stuck it in this hole we have? And then it was like, oh, that actually feels pretty good and works pretty well. And then we also, at the same time, like, we were still kind of not quite working, which is when we put the little wood block in. That was something we'd recorded with our taiko players, because it was something we liked and we weren't sure how we would use it or where, but it seemed like an appropriate thing to have. And so then we took that little opening that Stephen had written, and we edited the ring theme onto that, and then put the woodblock on that, and then went into what was the original overture. And it was like, okay, that feels pretty nice. So then we played that for everyone over the mock-up of the opening they'd had, and then it was like everyone was instantly happy, and then that was what happened. So it was it's one of those nice things where we were able to assemble this in a way that feels composed and feels like a continuous logical piece of music, but it was actually something that came about later, and was never actually planned.
That's
Yeah.
right.
We never planned to start the film with the ring theme
That
in
is
that way.
you are correct. Yeah.
It just sort of was like, it just happened.
I'm
Yeah.
glad it did, because at the time we saw the opening and figured out what we would need, we'd finished recording, and
Yeah.
it was too late for us to go and record new material.
Yeah.
And thanks to the editing prowess of Mark Willsher, it turned out beautiful. And also, I think adding the Japanese percussion, those flourishes,
Which you
to
had
that
put
opening.
they were in the opening, though.
Yeah, they were. But it sort of allowed us to introduce, okay, you are in Middle Earth and you're about to go into a Middle Earth environment and story.
Right.
But it is from it's a slightly different experience now. So introducing that sort of like the color of the Japanese percussion early was a way to say, welcome back. Things are a little different here.
And it's a nice little nod to the anime style as well, to have some Japanese percussion in there.
Yeah, that was something that Kamiyama-san, who's a very generous director, really encouraged us to explore, which was amazing, because I'm sort of slightly nervous about the idea of cultural appropriation, but to be invited in to explore that that world was a huge privilege.
Yeah. Well, that's an incredible behind the scenes story. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Mark.
Well,
I've forgotten.
it's
No, you're
funny
right.
with this stuff
I've
because,
forgotten of that.
well, exactly, because when things kind of you've lived with it now for so long, and the way that it ended up, it's very easy that to forget what how it actually ended up.
The same sort of thing happened with the we had a Gondor theme, actually.
That's right.
That initially we recorded a version of the Gondor theme, which happens when Hera is captured and brought to Isengard. In a version of the film that we wrote to, she gets up and parts the sort of the curtain to look out, and we see this incredibly impressive shot of the tower, the Orthanc, and the camera used to sort of just go up the tower. It was this beautiful kind of long reveal, and we thought, we need to mark this somehow, and it needs to be a theme from the original trilogy, or something that sort of signifies this tower. And we decided upon the Gondor theme, because at that point, it's that place is under the stewardship of Gondor. It's prior to Saruman taking over. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it absolutely was, because we felt like it was kind of it felt like kind of almost like I mean, it almost felt like a bit of an Easter egg for fans, because like the
Yeah.
Tolkien fans would know that
Why that was
Isengard
chosen. Yeah.
was sort of, that tower was built by Gondor, and at the
Oh.
time was, and so it felt like kind of a nod where it was like, there was no way we would be like, because at the time we also did want to like, we didn't want to only use the Rohan theme because it felt a little bit weird if we only did, but of course we're in Rohan the whole time, and it's like, so it felt like a way that we could actually get in, another really memorable theme of Howard's, but in a way that would, for the sort of Tolkien fans, would be like,
Makes sense.
they'd like, oh, this makes sense. But then that whole thing, obviously, then it changed, because of course what happened is that the concern is that we see Hera's captured, and then she looks outside and we see Isengard, or sorry, we see Orthanc, but she's not in Orthanc.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's right.
And so then it got changed so that we see sort of the areas around it, which are Isengard, and then we see the tower later. And then it didn't make any more sense at that point to sort of try to shoehorn that in there.
But we did leave it in for the
it's on the
soundtrack.
album.
Yeah, it's on the album
It's on the
because we wanted
album.
to put everything that we recorded out, essentially. And largely that's because we both are big fans of the complete recordings that Lord of the Rings released, which have, in total about 13 or 14 hours of music across the trilogy. And it made sense, in a streaming platform. Why not just put out everything? You're under no obligation to listen to it all, but it's there if you do.
Well, and we knew we weren't going to get an opportunity to do it later, so.
True. Yes. And hey, has the vinyl just turned up? The vinyl soundtrack. It's just turned up at your
mine
house.
came today.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. The CD turned up.
Oh my goodness.
Which I'm yeah, it's a lovely thing to hold.
Oh wow, look at that. It's a beautiful cover and everything.
It is. It's the artwork is amazing. And yeah, there's a vinyl release of the album that Mark has just taken delivery of. It's 4-disc set with some notes. And how does it look?
It looks great.
Fantastic.
Let me just go and get it while you keep talking, and I'll
keep talking.
I'm quite excited about this.
While he's going,
Thanks,
as the audience, I think it was very wise to take that ring theme away from When the Goblins. I thought that was very wise to do that. Not only because it did make it feel colder, not to have any music, but also if the ring theme was going in there, I would have thought that the close-up was the ring, like the One Ring.
Absolutely.
And I think that just goes to show the power that music can have for stories along decades.
Absolutely. And not only for stories, but for memory and association. You're quite right. I think initially it felt right to the cut that we worked on, but I'm glad it got taken out. I think it's, look at this. Oh my goodness.
There it is. Wow. That's beautiful.
and it's got
that's so
wow.
cool.
And then but what's actually really, really, if you pre-ordered it, the I don't know how well you'll be able to see this in this light, but the vinyl is this like white marble.
I did pre-order. Oh my god, I'm so excited. I think mine's turning out next week.
Mark, so where can people get this?
You can order it on, what's the website? Mutant?
Is made by Mutant.
Made by Mutant.
Okay. Okay, we'll put links into that so people can see that.
And it's actually this vinyl, the Made by Mutant who did these. It's actually, the company is owned by Elijah Wood.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. It's a nice little.
It's like such a small world in the Lord of the Rings world.
Yes.
Well, Mark and Stephen, this has been so wonderful to talk with both of you. As we finish up here, do you have any advice for aspiring musicians or people who would want to do what you are doing? Maybe Mark, can we start with you? What advice do you have?
I get asked this a lot. And I actually try to vary up my answers from time to time. But the number one thing I would say is that when you're starting out, um, it's really hard to know where your opportunities will come from. Because I feel like, you can be really good and you can prepare and you can kind of do all your networking and try and do everything. But I personally feel like there's a not insignificant part of it that is luck. And certainly for me, I mean, it just, like the way that I got onto the Rings films in the middle, was like, I mean, it was pretty lucky. I mean, I was I had the right skills and I'd done the work and that opportunity was there, but it was also, it could have easily been very different. And so I guess the main thing I feel is that it's kind of important to be as broad with your skill set and sort of abilities as possible so that when sort of your opportunity comes along, you're able to really seize it. And I think sometimes it's easy to be, if you're too narrowly focused and the opportunity that comes along doesn't fit quite within that narrow focus that you set your sort of path on, then I think you can potentially miss out on opportunities. And so it's sort of, I guess it's that simply that, being as prepared as possible across a broad range of things so that whatever your opportunity ends up being, you can take it and then steer it in the direction you want it to go in, if that makes sense.
That does. Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you.
That's really good
Stephen,
advice,
what
Mark
do you have?
Willsher. I don't know that this is stunningly original or insightful, but I think my advice would be that working in film, working in media is a collaborative situation, and that means working with people. And I think being a good collaborator, being a good team player, and realizing that it's possible for you to go further than you thought possible by yourself when you're in a collaborative situation. And that really the essence of this is people and storytelling. And it's, I don't know, I think when I first was getting into film, there was a lot of talk about auteur and auteur theory, and I wouldn't go so far to say that I feel like that's a myth, but I feel like some of the greatest things have come through collaboration. So I think, and I would also go so far as to say that being a composer is essentially like you're in a service industry, and ultimately what our focus is on is the director's intent, the story that they're trying to tell, and how we can help them tell that story. Yeah, that would be my basically the root of this is collaboration. It's not something that you're going to do by yourself. Yeah, so a self-evident piece of advice, but one I think that's fairly important to keep in mind. It's a real, it's a, you know,
very much
and yeah, that's really, I mean, I could probably drone on for hours, but I won't do that. But so I guess fundamentally in terms of how to action that is if you're interested in film, if you're interested in theater, interested in TV, there are other people around where you live in your community that will have the same interests. Go and talk to them and ask people questions, and don't be afraid to try to collaborate with people, other people who may be, you know, from a completely different mindset, geographical location. It's sometimes great things can come out of that.
Great. Fantastic. Wonderful advice. Fantastic stories. Just, it's been such a joy to talk with both of you. I just really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to talk with you. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Christine.
And I also get to watch the sun come up, which is actually something I haven't done for a while. So thank you very much.